Good afternoon and welcome to Nutrition at Noon. We're just going to give folks a couple of minutes to sign on. And as you can see, we have a special guest today. So I'm excited that you're all here. So we'll just give it a few seconds for some extra friends to sign on. Are you excited, Kevin? This is going to be a good one.
So excited, Mandy. Thank you for having me today. Really looking forward to having a conversation.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm just going to start with some housekeeping. If you're new to Nutrition at Noon, just know that you are unseen and unheard, so you can do whatever you want in the background. If you are coming back, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We are going to have a really great talk today, and I'm so excited to have a special guest. You know, we've been talking so much about cooking and dusting off those cookbooks and going online and getting recipes, and it's all about staples. But here's the problem. A lot of times we're not talking about my favorite staple, which is spices. So today I've invited Kevan Vetter, who is the executive chef and director of culinary development at McCormick Spice Company, to join us. And Kevin, first of all, what a title.
Yeah, it's a little long, isn't it?
But he is all things spice, and I am so glad that you could join us today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to start out with just a few minutes of sort of Spice Basics 101, the things that Kevin and I hear all the time. And then we're going to launch into live, question and answer from the questions that you're giving us. So make sure you're putting in some questions for us. And, this is all about spices today. So I have to ask you, Kevin, and this might be a rhetorical question, you being a chef, but why do you use spices?
Why do I use spices?
Yeah, why do you use spices?
Just spices bring the flavor to the party. You can't imagine, when I open my spice cabinet, I bet I have 60 or more bottles in there, and I just can't imagine not cooking without spices. Just a plain chicken breast, plain rice, that wouldn't cut it. And I think so many other people feel the same.
Right.
Just the small bottles bring so much flavor.
Right, exactly. And it's all about flavor. So let's see if we can. It looks like our PowerPoint does not want to move forward. Let's see if I can move it forward a different way.
All right. It might be just going over here today, Mandy.
It doesn't want to move for us. Maybe we have a little bit of a slow connection today. Just forgive us.
This is the new normal of working from
right? Technology, it's our friend and our foe.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to ask if we can have some technical assistance. Melanie, our nutritionist, actually helps us quite a bit here. Melanie, oh, there we go. Finally. Yeah. Okay. So moving forward, and I don't know who that is, whether that was me, Melanie, whatever, but thank you just the same. So the number one reason we use spices is flavor. And Kevin, as a chef, I know that you love that. But when we look at this, everywhere we go around the world, we all start with those same ingredients. And really what makes it special are those herbs and spices. It adds lots of flavor, exactly what Kevin talked about, but it also adds a wonderful aroma. Nothing beats the fresh smell of basil, or maybe it's a beautiful curry that's a bright yellow. So without those things, maybe food and eating wouldn't be as delicious. So when we think about cuisines, Kevin, is there one that's most popular in the United States, and is there one that's most popular in the Vetter household?
Yeah, so Italian cuisine, I'd say, is still number one. Italian, Mexican cuisine, and Chinese cuisine or Asian cuisine are the three that people love, and in varying forms of more mainstream meals, and then exploring other areas. Like in Mexican cuisine, people are exploring more some of the regions of Mexico. It's not just about tacos and some staples, but exploring. In the Vetter household, I'd say we lean towards Mediterranean. And then followed by Asian. There's not a flavor profile on that slide that I don't personally love.
Or wholeheartedly endorse, right?
Absolutely. It's interesting. All of these cuisines do use some similar spices, but they're all used in different combinations and with different ingredients and different cooking techniques. And that's really what makes cooking and experimenting in the kitchen so fun. as somebody who's cooked for a long time, just the constant pursuit of learning is learning about new ingredients, new flavors, new dishes, something I just love.
Right. Well, and one really great thing that we have at Giant Food is a handout on different ways to actually create these different cuisines. So if you love all these spices, later we're going to give you an email that you can send to us and say, send me that spice sheet. Now, let's move on and let's talk about those frequently asked questions. Now, I know that we get a lot of questions in the grocery store, and I know, Kevin, you probably can't walk anywhere in the whole world and not have spice questions, but we've lined up our top questions. We're gonna go through those, and like I said, we're gonna jump into some live questions with Kevin next. Okay, so first up, is it an herb or is it a spice, right? This is something people ask a lot because we often hear them used interchangeably, but really there is a difference. Herbs are those leaves on shrubs, and spices actually come from the bark or root, buds, the seeds and berries, and these all tend to be those tropical plants and trees, right? Now, sometimes though they can be the same, like you see here, the cilantro and the coriander, so that comes from the same bush, but Kevin, when you think about herbs and spices on the shelves, can you give us some examples of maybe what bark looks like or what herbs we might see?
Sure. So cinnamon is actually a bark. So it's a really interesting process. On average, when we harvest our cinnamon trees, they're about 15 years old. The bark is stripped off and then cleaned and dried and processed, and which is really interesting. Most people don't really think about where their spices come from, but
right.
Something like allspice grows on a tree. It starts out as a berry and then is dried, but it's growing 50, 75 feet up. Herbs, things like basil and oregano, they're what you might grow in your pot in your backyard, just a much larger scale. And things like ginger and turmeric, they grow underground. So I think it's just really fascinating how herbs and spices could be any part of the plant. And your example of cilantro and coriander are great examples of same plant, different part of the plant that's being used as spices.
So are they actually interchangeable? Like if someone uses the word herb instead of spice or spice instead of herb, is that okay?
Not really, because they really are, they are different parts of the plant. As you referenced here, the herbs typically are the leaves, and then the spices are anything that's not a leaf, essentially.
Right.
So, and spices tend to be a little bit hardier. So things like, cumin seed, fennel seed, coriander seed, they're a little bit hardier, where herbs such as oregano and dill and basil, they're a little bit lighter, and their shelf life isn't quite as long. But so I prefer not to interchange them. They are different.
Gotcha. So you heard it here. Get it right? Now, there is a caveat though. Sometimes those blends, that'll be an herb and a spice together, right? So then you can sort of call it.
That's absolutely right. And that's what we call a seasoning blend. Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So our next question, how long is this good? And so for a lot of us, we've got a spice cabinet, and I use a Lazy Susan, so I can always see everything that I have. But some people just push them kind of in the back. So we had talked about this before. Some people have heirloom spices, right? Ones that have been around for a while. But as a rule, under 3 years is really the shelf life of those herbs and spices, and those extracts last a little bit longer. But I have to ask the question, if we have expired spices and herbs, should we be throwing those out right now?
Not right now. In a normal time, we would say yes, if they've gone past the best by date. But we know that sometimes spices right now in this COVID-19, a little bit hard to find in some cases. So spices actually don't ever go bad. They just lose their flavor. So you might find that if you have an herb or spice that's maybe past its best by date, we recommend that you smell it. Maybe crush it a little bit in your hand to break, to see what is the aroma. And you might just have to use a little bit more in your recipe than what you'd normally call for if it's a little bit older. So they'll never go bad. They just lose flavor. So you might need to just use a little bit more right now until you can get out and replace them at a later date.
So Melanie, one of our nutritionists, actually did a whole segment on expiration dates. So if you haven't seen that one, definitely check it out. And this definitely applies to our herbs and spices as well. is there ever a time when they are too old? How can we tell if it is time? Because I know that they just decrease in potency, but is there ever a time where we should throw them out?
When they don't smell at all like what they should. So if you have basil that smells like grass clippings, or if you have a tin other than black pepper. So I have a couple tins. I meant to grab them before I came downstairs for this call.
Right.
I have a tin of celery flakes from I have no idea when. It was in my parents' house that I snagged when we were cleaning out their spice cabinet. But if it no longer has the aroma and flavor of what it should be, then I think it probably is time to go at that point.
Right, and it's probably a lot like our foods. If you open it up and it's a weird color or it smells weird, that's where we want to use our judgment. And are there any recommendations as far as how we should store our spices so that we can actually make them last longer?
Yeah, the best way to store them is in just kind of a cool, dry place away from the stove. I know it's so convenient to line them up right behind the stove, but the heat, helps them, makes them lose flavor. When you're cooking, instead of sprinkling over the pot, which to this day, I'm still guilty of.
Yeah.
Do it, because that moisture gets up into the spice bottle, it starts to degrade the flavor. So measure away from a boiling pot, measure into your measuring spoon or to your hand, and then add it in. So really, how you store them has a huge impact on the shelf life of them. So nice, coolish, dark place, and they'll keep for 3-4 years, no problem.
Great. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. And I promise we're almost to those live questions, so hang in there, folks. So the next question that I often hear is, are the fresh and dried interchangeable, and how do we swap them? And are they interchangeable? And the answer there is, it's complicated. Spices can be complicated too. On average, we use those dried spices and herbs for like longer cooking, and then fresh, just to kind of finish things off. And then what makes it complicated? Are you making potato salad? Are you making pasta salad? We're getting into those summer months where we're doing that, where you might use fresh and dried. So Kevin, can you help us sort through this? Like, when would you use dried whole versus ground? Like, how do we do that?
So dried whole, basil is a great example of how you can use different forms in different recipes. So when you make a tomato sauce, using dried basil, if you're going to cook that tomato sauce for an hour or so, give it that long, homemade, slow simmered, dried basil is perfect for that, because that flavor is going to release as it cooks and really just give a great depth of flavor. Or if you were to add fresh basil into that at the beginning, you're really not going to have any of that flavor left. Fresh basil is good for finishing, and garnishing. We have our gourmet garden lightly dried basil that's perfect for sprinkling on top. So sliced tomatoes or mozzarella, and that gourmet garden lightly dried is perfect for that as a finishing touch. Now, using ground spices, if you want faster flavor, ground spices will kind of, their flavor will bloom quicker than a whole spice. So if you need to get something on the table, you have something that's a little bit quicker cooking, but you want to use a little bit less ground, because it's gonna, in a tomato sauce, ground basil or ground oregano will give it a darker color. So you can use a little bit less, because that flavor is going to bloom faster than using a whole herb.
Gotcha. And why fresh herbs at the end?
Because the volatile oils will just splash up perfectly. Fresh herbs aren't designed for longer, slower cooking processes, so it's more of just a finish.
Now I'm going to throw something random out there. What about I'm going to pronounce it totally wrong, the garnet bouquet, how do you pronounce that? Where you wrap everything up with a string?
Right. Like, so some of those spices there, like rosemary and thyme, they even when they're fresh, they're a little bit hardier. So something that's got a woodier stem like thyme and rosemary, they can cook a little bit longer. But one of the things that we always say, if you buy fresh spices for a recipe and you only use a little bit, then you've got the rest of those fresh herbs in your produce drawer. So the convenience of and flavor of our whole and ground spices, they're always in your cupboard, they're always ready to roll, and they don't turn into that black soupy mess in your produce drawer.
So, little tip here, and you probably know this, but maybe our viewers don't. Leslie, one of our nutritionists, always recommends using your leftover fresh spices in your salads, which, you know, I know that sounds silly, but that was a real aha moment for me. Like I was like, ah, of course.
That's a great tip. That's a great.
Okay. Now, when we want to swap, okay, so say the recipe calls for fresh, but all we have is dried, or vice versa. What's a rule of thumb for that?
So if your recipe called for, say, 3 tablespoons of fresh basil, you would use 1 teaspoon of dried. So the typical ratio is 3 to 1. So if you've got 3 parts fresh, you would use 1 part dry, because the flavor of the dried is much more concentrated. So there definitely is a ratio that you want to follow. And if you want to add a little bit more as the cooking process goes on, if you feel like it needs a little bit of boost, feel free to do it. The thing with cooking is that you're always tasting when you're cooking and adjusting your flavor.
And that's probably why I'm never hungry when dinner comes around, right? Because I'm constantly tasting. And that's probably really helpful too. If you are using some older spices and maybe the recipe called for a tablespoon of you know, cumin, and maybe your cumin's older, you might need to add more along the way. And I feel like I always do that. I never feel like I have enough spice.
Yeah, you know, cooking by recipe is great, and cooking by feel and flavor is you know, essential. Just always be seasoning, always be tasting. It's the perfect way to get the perfect dish.
Well, that leads into the next really big question I always get, and that is like, how do you flavor with spice? And using spices with a recipe is, you know, the way that most of us do it, but using spices without a recipe is really hard. You know, and so I often get a lot of questions like, what's good with chicken? What's good with pork? And how do I know? And so with these single spices, if this is a problem for you, I definitely say screen grab this. But Kevan, let me ask you a question. When is the best time to season our meats? Is it before? Is it during? Is it after? Like, how should we be spicing our meats?
You know, it depends on what you're making. If you're cooking something on the grill, seasoning before you grill is the way to go. If you're building something like a stew or something that's slow simmered, seasoning early and then seasoning through the cooking process is important as well. If you were making something where you were sweating onions and celery and carrots, you could, you know, season a little bit then. And when you added in maybe some stew meat, you could season it again and just build those layers of flavor as you're building out that dish. And you know, I love this slide because it gives some great recommendations of flavors to use with different proteins. But one thing that we always love to, you know, impress on people is cook what you love, and then be bold enough to take a step outside of your comfort zone and cook something you haven't tried.
Right.
Because you never know. I mean, I think that's the beauty of being an experimental chef, is to have dishes you love and your family loves, but also be willing to take a step outside and try something new and really add something to the repertoire that you love.
Great. And if we're marinating something, do we season again after we've marinated, or is it just you marinate and you're done? Like, or it depends.
Your marinade will probably do the job well enough if you built a really nice marinade. So you've got oil, you've got some acid, you've got the seasoning component. That should bring you tons of flavor. We use a 5-minute massage marinade technique that really drives in the flavor, and it's perfect. But if you know, it's okay to season a little extra if you feel like if you need some more flavor there.
Gotcha. Okay, so I have 2 more questions, and then I swear we're going to get to those live questions. Hang tight, folks. We're almost there. The next one has to do with vegetables, and I saw the funniest post, and I think Jillian, one of our nutritionists, reposted it, and it said, your vegetables aren't boring, you are. And I think that was so true, because we often cook vegetables, like steam them and then just put them on a plate, and we're not seasoning them. So we should probably flavor with spice here too, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I love to grill vegetables, and I make a quick marinade for vegetables. So I'll take zucchini and squash, onions, peppers, mushrooms, add a little bit of vinegar. I use a Brazilian steakhouse marinade, so I'm using something, you know, for grill mates that's typically on beef, on vegetables. Let them marinate about 30 minutes, get out to the grill. But you can do the same in the saute pan when you're cooking carrots. Add a little splash of cinnamon in there, and that's really going to bring just a nice lively flavor to it. So, you know, I hate that people just think of vegetables of just salt and pepper. Vegetables, there's a whole world of flavor out there with, you know, 4 herbs and spices as well as seasoning blends that'll just really make veggies taste delicious.
Right, and I think if you're cooking Mexican flavors, add Mexican seasonings. I mean, it seems, really logical, but I think it's kind of an afterthought, and the nutritionist team wants it to be a forethought. And then, of course,
I love veggies, and I feel like it's just a great opportunity to add more flavor.
Yeah, I agree. And the other area that nutritionists always love talking about is how do we make things healthier? And often people don't say to me, like, how do you use spices to be healthier? What they say is, how can I eat healthier? And spices are the answer. And when we did our podcast, I had posed a question to you about salt, and I said, can anything really replace salt to make it taste more? And you surprised me and you said yes. You said it was heat, right?
Yeah, heat, a little bit of acid. There's always ways to, if you're trying to reduce sodium in your diet, spices are the perfect way to bring that flavor. Things like onion and garlic, red pepper, black pepper, they all bring that flavor back and lift the flavor up. Salt is a great flavor enhancer, but you can use spices as a natural flavor enhancer. Your point of cayenne pepper, that is a natural flavor potentiator that lifts all the other flavors up. So you may not add enough to make it spicy, you're just adding enough to make it really just give it a little bit of pop of flavor, which is a great tip if you're trying to reduce your sodium.
Right, right. And the same goes for if you're trying to reduce butter or the sugar in your life, just adding a new layer of flavor is going to be a great way to do that. And I love that about spices. And I'm going to now just quickly go over some favorite spices that the nutritionists love. Then Kevin's got his picks. And then I swear, live questions. I'll go through this quickly. That way we can get to those. But fresh herbs are always going to be something the nutritionists recommend. I love picking something like this fresh roasting blend pack because it has everything there. And then you don't have a ton of leftover fresh herbs. But, like Leslie says, put them in your salad. Nature's Promise has some great rubs that have no sodium added, like this Persian orange rub with tarragon. It's so good. Of course, shout out to McCormick and Perfect Pinch. We love this. We talk about it in our heart health classes because it's salt-free. And then things like Tasty Bite. Look the other way, Kevin. That's not yours. That has lots of flavors all packed in, so you don't have to buy all those individual spices. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell you how to build a better burger. Taste of Inspirations, which is one of our brands too, has some really great ways to make burgers taste better. So that is my pitch for seasoning and spices. Kevin, let's hear about yours.
Right. These are some of my favorites. The one skillets are sheet pan and one skillet meals. I don't know about you. I love to cook, but I'm not a big fan of, there you go, Mandy. I'm not a big fan of cleaning. So if I only have one pan to clean at the end of the meal, these are great. We've got flaked salmon. You mentioned you made, before we came on the air, you made our bourbon, our roasted pork tenderloin with bourbon and sweet potatoes or carrots. The Tuscan chicken and vegetable skillet, it's got and pantry staples. It's got tomatoes, it's got cannellini beans, it's got spinach. So it's satisfying.
I think that's
flavor.
Lisa's favorite. I think that's our lead, the director of healthy living. That's her favorite.
And then our gourmet garden products. It's really ginger and garlic and basil. They're paste. They're in the produce section. So convenient, just a quick squeeze and you're not worried about killing ginger and garlic. And then the lower sodium products that we have in our taco, and then our lower sodium mozzarella steak. The lower sodium mozzarella steak is, Andy, you are just on it. I don't have anything to hold up.
And I didn't even shop for him, Kevin.
If my spice cabinet wasn't so ugly right now, I'd take you on a tour of my spice cabinet. It's packed. And so our taco and mozzarella steak, certainly staples. And then the Chinook pepper, that's one of our new products from our Global Select. So it's like a peppercorn that's got a really nice citrusy grapefruit note, but it also has a little bit of a tongue tingling note to it.
Really, I wish we had smell-o-vision. It smells so good.
It's a pepper from the pollen. It's just a really great flavor. So unexpected. A little bit of a tongue tingling note to it, almost like a Szechuan peppercorn, but not as intense. It's great on fresh berries. So if you're looking for kind of a unique dessert, just take some fresh blackberries and raspberries, a little bit of smooth pepper on top of that. And it's just really a great finish to a meal.
And berries are coming into season now. So I think that's a great suggestion. It's trying something new. And that's what the nutritionists always encourage. And I love that all of these products make it easy and it lasts longer, since we're only getting to the grocery stores now when we absolutely have to. Being able to have these fresh herbs and spices is really helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, folks. Ask the expert. We're finally here. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us and waiting for us to get to these questions. So Kevin, are you ready?
Let's go. I'm ready.
All right, so let's see. Can you freeze spices?
We don't recommend freezing dried herbs and spices. There's just too much moisture that could get into the bottle. So if you keep them in a cabinet or a pantry, away from heat, away from moisture, away from light, that's really the best place to store them.
Okay. Does McCormick offer tours of their factories? That's a good question. I want to know.
Unfortunately, we do not. Just that over the years, I think when we were down on Light Street, we used to have a tea house that people could come into, but over the years, we sort of had to eliminate that part of it, just for security reasons.
Now, one of the things I have up here is this Instagram live capture, and I want to give a shout out to your son, Ryan, who is your chief engineer and operator on that. But can you tell us about Instagram Live? Like, how often are you on there? What's coming up, and what should we be looking for?
Yep. So we've started a new McCormick Live series that we're doing on Facebook as well as Instagram, and we're doing some live events, usually once or twice a week now. As well as Instagram stories. Both of those are McCormick Spice, both Facebook and Instagram. So just really a great resource. We've had a lot of fun cooking from our home kitchens, showing some recipes that are indulgent, and some that are healthy. We had one of our kitchen team members do some cooking with her nieces and nephews. So made
Nice.
some taco chicken fingers with some roasted broccoli. So really, we're just trying to provide inspiration for people to be able to cook great things at home, to share with friends and family, and just eat well during all of this.
Yeah, and I know that you guys are also you're keeping the recorded versions, just like we're keeping recorded versions of Nutrition at Noon, so people can go back and look at them, right?
Yep. So if you go to the McCormick Spice Instagram channel, we've got a lot of stuff there, and then the center there, you've got our Flavor Maker app. So that's an app that we started about a year ago. It's a great resource. You can, whether you have an iOS, an iPhone, or an Android phone, you can go and download the app. It's got some of our Flavor Makers videos. It's got recipe content. It's got actually you can scan your spice, make a digital spice rack by scanning what you have in your spice cabinet. And then that way, when you're standing at the store, you go, oh, do I have cumin? You can actually look at your phone once you've loaded up your digital spice rack. It's a really cool tool.
Okay, so I have another question for you. What herbs should I grow on my windowsill?
Well, I guess it depends on your green thumb. My wife and I always grow basil here. We do a couple pots on the deck every year, make fresh pesto out of it. Some things are easier to grow. Rosemary is pretty easy to grow. Basil's pretty bulletproof. I've never had much luck with dill. I don't know what my problem is with growing that. Basil, if you want to grow something easy, rosemary and basil are pretty easy to grow.
Right. So this is a tough question, and this is a sciencey question for you here, Kevin. Some fruits and vegetables are created from developing hybrids of two things. Are there herb hybrids out there?
Wow, that's a really good question. I have not seen any herb hybrids.
Yeah.
I think herbs and spices have just kind of grown the way that they've grown, for years and years. There's a couple, when I walk like the seed area in Home Depot, there are different varietals of basil, but I don't know that they
like a basil cilantro.
No, I've not seen any basil cilantro anywhere.
I think you're on to something. The person who posted this, I think you're on to something. Okay, do spices have nutritional value? And if you don't mind, I'm going to hop in and say something here. We are going to actually do another spice presentation that's going to go into more of these types of questions. But Kevin, if you want to kind of hop in and give your 2 thoughts on it, but definitely stay tuned. We are also doing a class, an hour-long class all about spices. That's going to go a lot deeper and talk about some of also the medicinal thoughts about spices. So stay tuned for that. But Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that one?
From a nutritional perspective, from a calorie perspective, herbs and spices are very low in calories, but they bring just a ton of flavor. But there's also some other, potential benefits of things like cinnamon and turmeric in terms of inflammation, other things like that. There's a lot of research that's happening around that. So they add very little in the way of calories and fat, bring just a ton of flavor, and they have some other potential benefits that go along with some of them, which I think is incredible.
A question I got, this is a good one. Does the date start, that expiration good for 2 to 3, 4 years, start when you open the spice or when you buy the spice?
Once you open that spice, all of our products are well sealed to keep the freshness in there. So once you open it, and there is a best by date. All of our products now have best by dates, which again, a best by date is more of or a best before date is more of a recommendation. Again, spices don't ever really go bad. It's really a matter of how you cook with them, how you keep them, and try and maintain that flavor integrity as best you can.
So a question here is, how long does that paste last in the tubes?
The paste will last, I want to say it's once you open it in your fridge, I would say you've got 30 days, the little cups of the lightly dried. Once you open it, 30 days in your fridge as well. So it's got a nice long shelf life on it. I use about a tube of garlic a week and about a tube of ginger every 2 weeks. So they don't last long in my house. They do have a nice long shelf life on it.
There's nothing that doesn't taste better with garlic and onion. So yes, use it liberally. Yep. Can you recommend a spice that you would add to a smoothie?
I would add a cinnamon to a smoothie. We have a recipe online. It's a berry smoothie with coconut milk and a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla. And it's really rich and refreshing. I'm trying to think of other things. So any of the sweet spices, really. So a little bit of nutmeg, cinnamon, maybe a little bit of cardamom. Cardamom could be interesting to add to like a mango smoothie. Give a little bit of a Indian-inspired flavor.
Great. How many total spices does McCormick make? So how many spices are out there with your name on it?
Wow. Well, we have thousands and thousands of products between, all the kind of the core spices that we sell, and then the seasoning blends, and then the recipe mixes. We have a ton of different products. I don't have a firm number, but when you walk into that set, it's amazing how many things are there. It's optional flavor.
And so, Kevin, what percentage of those products do you have in your kitchen?
I have a full 2-door cabinet that is just chocked pretty much from, not so much the top shelf, but I would bet I have between 60 and 100 different products and multiples of some of them.
Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to have you come back and I want a full tour of your kitchen. And I want to look at the spices, so stay tuned. You're not going to get away from me. I know you're sheltering in place, so I'll find you. Okay, so what are the 5 spices that you think are essential? If we could only take 5 spices to a desert island, what 5 are they?
That's going to be pretty tough for me, but I'm going to say, and I'll probably go over 5, but I'm going to say garlic, basil, oregano, crushed red pepper, black pepper, and then my other 5 would be
other 5.
Well,
the B team.
So that's such a hard question. And I think it goes back to your slide where you had some of the flavor profiles in the cuisine, and it really is what do you lean towards in terms of what you like to cook. A Mediterranean set is going to be different from an Asian flavor profile. But I could never narrow it down to 5.
It's like children, right? You have enough love to reach all of them.
Exactly.
So here's a question. Is salt considered a spice?
Salt is actually a mineral, so it's not really considered a spice. So because it comes from essentially as a mineral from the earth, so it's more considered, it's not really technically an herb or a spice, but it's great, it's a flavor enhancer.
So speaking of salt, I have a question here. Besides salt, what seasoning do you recommend for tofu?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I kind of
Um,
feel like all of them, right?
yeah, tofu just takes on just the flavor of however you want to season it. So, if you wanted a tofu taco, use Mexican-inspired flavors,
Hmm.
cumin, garlic, chilies. If you wanted to take it more Asian, ginger and garlic, a touch of soy, a little sesame. So tofu is really great. When we were doing one of our culinary summits in London a few years back, one of the best things I ate like a food stall place was a tofu taco bao bun, and the
Ah,
flavor was so delicious, and it was sort of Asian inspired, so it had a lot of garlic and ginger and chilies in it, and it was amazing. I became a believer in tofu after I.
awesome. Well, I think, Kevin, that we could ask questions from you for the next 3 hours, but it's nutrition at noon is supposed to be 15 minutes and we're going into triple time. So I am going to wrap up this question section real quick and just point out two things on this slide that we didn't ask the expert. One is about the McCormick Science Institute for spices. And if you sign up for our class, we're going to talk about that and what they're doing. And then of course, at the bottom there, the Spice It Up podcast. If you really love spices, you will love this podcast. Go online right now, pull out your phone, download Nutrition Made Easy, and look for Spice It Up because Kevin actually gives you the story of cinnamon and how it comes actually to your table. And it's really fascinating, lots of other interesting topics. So definitely download that. Now, I'm going to take a minute and have Kevin explain to us how you can get more information, how you can ask more questions. I did want to point out this month's Savory magazine is all about big flavor. So if you love big flavor, definitely check that out. It's online also. So Kevin, do you want to walk through and tell our viewers how they can get more questions answered, how they can find out more about spice?
Yep. So if you go to McCormack.com, that's our website. We've got just a ton of great resources. If you go to the Get Inspired tab, we have a huge Q&A section. So when this all started, we put up kind of a call for questions, and we got about 450 questions over the first week. And we answer them. We're trying to get them up, as well as I mentioned our Instagram channels at McCormick Spice, Facebook at McCormick Spice. So all of these are just great resources for learning more about spices, getting some recipe inspiration, learning about some new products, and just having fun with cooking. Which is something I've done for an awful long time, and I'd
Mhm.
love to see people do the same.
Perfect. And of course, you guys know about us at Giant and all of our great resources, but I have a special news flash for you all. Those of you who've stuck around and stuck through this extra long episode today, on Monday, we are doing a special edition of Nutrition at Noon. We are launching a May challenge. And if you're interested in it, you can go to giantfood.com/nutrition. We've already started posting some things about it. Kevin, I think I'm going to challenge you to this special challenge. So you stay tuned. It's all about getting more veggies in and getting more movement and eating healthier. So I'm going to definitely do a live challenge for you. Are you game for that?
I'm game. I'm in.
Okay, awesome. And of course, downloading our podcast, checking out our different information. Again, looking for Savory Magazine online to learn how to spice it up. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that we are getting tired of being at home, but by joining us online, we can all come together, try something new, learn something new. And really, when we stay home and help protect our loved ones, we're also protecting those first responders, those essential employees like those at our Giant Food. And Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Mandy. This has been great. Really appreciate it.
Great. And if for some
Look forward to
reason,
the challenge.
oh, you are so going to be in for this challenge because it is right up your alley. And if you wanted to share this with someone and maybe they didn't get a chance to sign in today, we will have this recorded so you can share Kevin's really great information with them later. But that's going to be it for us today. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.